to the Knowledge Stack podcast. My name's Jason. Thank you for joining me. Today's conversation is one with Derrick Van Mell. Derrick is the founder and principal at the Center for Management Terms and Practices. This is a standards body that focuses on the language of general management. It was an interesting conversation because I've never really talked about the language and terminology that's used in management. Derrick's firm specializes in this and has developed a coda, if you will, of how to talk about management in common terms and language. We got into some details around the evolution of an individual contributor making their way in the corporate world to management and then to executive management. We talked about some of the skills that are required to be a good manager. We talked about leadership and management. And it was just a great conversation with Derrick. Derrick's got a long career in management, and he had some really good insights into being a good manager. We talked a little bit about good manager versus bad manager. And I think this is a great episode for anyone looking to get started in a career and to figure out the best way to climb that corporate ladder. There's a lot of really good pieces of information, and there's a ton of information also available on Derrick's website, which is linked below in the show notes. There's a lot of really helpful tools that are in that link, and I encourage you to check them out. And if you have any questions or would like to engage with Derrick, all of the information, again, is available in the show notes. As always, thank you for watching and listening. Please subscribe on your podcast viewing or listening app of choice, whether that's Spotify or Good Pods or Apple Podcasts. That's certainly very helpful to our metrics or my metrics. I don't want to make it sound like there's a bunch of people managing this project. It's just me. So there's more to come. I am going to spend the rest of the day editing and recording these intros. So hopefully in the next few days, you'll see a few more episodes drop, as the kids say. Any questions, please feel free to reach out or comment. That would be great too. You can find me on LinkedIn, YouTube, all of the usual social places. I appreciate your viewer or listenership and look forward to producing more episodes of the Knowledge Stack podcast. Thank you very much and enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay. I'm here with Derrick Van Mell. Derrick is the principal at the Center for Management Terms and Practices. Derrick caught my attention. There was some outstanding stuff in his bio related to management and some horrible bosses. So, Derrick, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and give us a quick overview of your background?
Sure. Well, Jason, thanks for having me on. It's great to be part of your roster of really impressive people, and I love Megan's podcast too. I thought that was just great. So I found
appreciate that. I'm gonna, I'll definitely tag her in this post so that she can enjoy that. She's the younger folks, so they absolutely love the shout outs. So.
All right. Well, I'm happy to do it. And so I founded and run the Center for Management Terms and Practices, and we're the standards body for general management. And everybody can remember a bad boss that they've had and how not to do it and what not to experience. And hopefully a lot of people also can remember a great boss. But one of the things that I realized after a career as a management consultant, working with lots of different organizations, for-profit, not-for-profit, fintech, low-tech, was that management seems to most people pretty chaotic, right? And I think I was in a meeting with 6 people in marketing. And after about 15 minutes, I asked the question, could everybody here just tell me, what is marketing? What's your definition? Everybody looked at each other, sort of laughed. Right? These are people who have been working in marketing for a long time. So, maybe it's my, strange credentials of, a business degree and an English degree, but maybe sort of look really hard at, what are the words in the lexicon of management? And so just sort of jump ahead a little bit, the realization came that the science of management, which is a social science of how people work together, has no standards, has no foundation. In music, you have musical notation, which allows people who might speak different languages to sit down with a score and start playing together and composing together, or the taxonomy of plants and animals for the biologists, and the periodic table of elements if you're in physics or engineering. But management never had a set of standards, and that caused all these circular conversations. And the cost of that, both operationally, is enormous, just enormous. Something like 60, I was just looking at these numbers, 60 to 65% of projects fail on their first day. That's not so good.
That's not great.
People don't have plans. Less than 10% of businesses have plans they actually follow. Why is that? For all our talk about strategy. So I realize there's not a standard of competence. What is a manager? What do they need to know? How is a manager different than a leader? That's a hot conversation. What are the ethics of being a manager? There's lots about corporate ethics, about sustainability, circular economy, wonderful stuff. But the ethics of being a manager, because as a manager, and I learned this the first day I became a manager a long time ago, a manager of one, you have so much power over your employees, so much power. I mean, with one bad day, one word, one day of neglect, you can really wreck one of your employees' lives. And no standard of ethics, no standard of competence, and no really definition of what success looks like, of being caring, competent, ethical person who helps people achieve great things together, which people love to do. So I developed these standards. That's a 10-year arc, piloted them with the Small Business Administration, developed a simple set of management tools, for meeting management, process improvement. You talked about, one of your guests talked about process improvement, project management, about 23,000 podcasts about project management, and planning, of course. And real simple one-page tools. These are all free. Created this, basically gave it the label standards-based management, not very exciting, but accurate. And so my mission now is sort of as a crusader to put this foundation of standards under the practice of management and leadership. And it works. How about that? And because people love to work together, they love to do it. And today, given AI, global conflict, political tensions, the need for good managers is going way, way up, just as engagement scores are going way, way down. We've actually, over the past 4 years, Gallup just did a study in January, engagement scores have now dropped to pandemic levels. So the premium on good managers is high and getting higher.
So the thing that I was drawn to, and it kind of fascinates me. You consulting is, you come into a boardroom, you sit at the front of the room, or you stand at the front of the room, you've got a PowerPoint deck, and you and 6,000 other consultants all stand in the front of the room and they say the same thing.
Yep.
Variation in how they say it, some variation in principles, some variation in focus, but essentially it's, here's how you should be a manager. Go be a manager. What I found interesting is you're not necessarily focusing on doing the management things. You're establishing the language. You're building the dictionary. You're putting together this framework and sharing this framework that is far more repeatable, far more structured, and a lot easier to share from organization to organization to organization. And I'm surprised that this is the first time I've heard of anybody doing this, because you just mentioned process management and process improvement and all of those, great principles, and, Toyota brought over, all of their great stuff, and Six Sigma and, DMAIC and all that great stuff. It's all structure, and it's all about standards, and it's all about repeatability and minimizing the opportunity for defects. And how do you do that? You put some structure around it. So why nobody's thought of that till now just baffles me.
Well, I have a theory.
Oh, absolutely.
About that. Yeah.
I'm all about the knowledge. Bring it.
Yeah, because no one's really able to calculate it, but the lowest estimate of the global spend on leadership development is $15 billion a year.
Wow.
Right? You think we'd be awash in great managers, but no. But maybe this is a little cynical, but I've been one of those consultants. I've been in front of the boards of directors, and trying to be the genius. Yeah. And, but there's money in that. There's money in jargon.
Mm-hmm.
There's money in repackaging, old management ideas, truths.
And when you say old, we're talking Romans. Like,
yeah,
some of these principles are, the cave, Plato's cave. I mean, like, these
Yeah.
are basic,
yeah.
really human principles that are just being repackaged over millennia.
Well, Jason, I'm impressed. You're the first person who has made that observation. And when I first developed sort of the standard, what former word was ontology, but framework of management, put it on a screen, made it interact simple. I shared it with a young woman who had just gotten her PhD from the University of Wisconsin-Madison, where I live, in taxonomy science, the science of organizing stuff, simple version.
Yep.
And she looked at what I had and she said, Derrick, this is not a catalog of inventions, techniques. This is an observation of fundamental human nature. And you heard me say, as I'm introducing myself, is that this is a deep human need. What makes us human is how we get along. And I often talk about the Romans or the Venetians. Most people don't know the Venetian Empire was a commercial empire, 1,000 years long, from about 700 to 1758, till Napoleon decided to put an end to it. And I've joked, if you dropped a laptop, and some good Wi-Fi, in the year 800 into Venice, the guys wouldn't be building spreadsheets. They'd know exactly what to do because they had currency exchanges, they had insurance, they had reinsurance.
How that worked,
Absolutely. Oh my gosh! And then he of course went to China, and you think they didn't know how to run businesses? Oh my gosh! Yeah. So the point is that how we work together is what makes us a species. It allows us to survive, and it's part of our nature. It's human nature. So we crave that connection. And
so why did it take 5,000 years?
Yeah,
it's crazy. It's insane.
Well, people are competitive naturally in business, right? As Venetians versus Phoenicians versus I'm getting my millennium mixed up, but you get the point. Right. And there's competition among businesses, of course, so they keep their what they think are insights secret, so they don't share. There's competition among the business schools. Yeah. There are 877 accredited business schools in the world, and you'd think that 100 years ago, one of them would have said, "Hey guys, we need to have some standards here on what management is." Now, as you're saying, I mean, there are lots of standards in the working world, right? ISO is an amazing organization. Standards about process improvement and sustainability, or many others. And ANSI here in the United States, there are the number of threads on the screws that you use to put in a light fixture standardized. Thank God.
Yep.
But not in management itself. So, but I think it's the competition. But I'm hoping, what I'm betting on, is that when people get a taste for, we adopt these standards, we can eliminate the chaos, we can communicate, we can accomplish great things as a team. So I can come to work every day, I can feel safe, I feel included, and I'm proud of what I've accomplished. So
absolutely. So equipped with all of that knowledge, equipped with the management taxonomy, how would you use that to identify, and we'll pivot to the bosses, the good boss, bad boss. How do we use those tools to identify a bad boss?
Well, bad bosses generally, have identified themselves
fairly
well, right?
I would agree.
But that's a rich question, Jason. So let's
the outlier cases that, I guess, the ones that are the Napoleonic dictator type boss. Those are pretty easy to identify,
right?
Those edge cases, those bosses that maybe are under equipped or not well trained, or maybe do things that they're not really thinking about in terms of leadership and things like that. How does the tools that you're developing help identify those types of bad bosses?
That's a great question. I'll talk about the outliers just a minute, because we were just discussing this yesterday morning in one of our work group sessions. But someone said that a leader or manager, same thing. We'll get to that. But a leader without morals is a tyrant. So they might have the title leader, and they give themselves title leader or boss, but they're not. And we could go down the rabbit hole of bad boss stories. But to your point, what about the person who maybe pursued the job of management, or maybe they're in the beginning of their career? You mentioned one of your guests is in this space and thinking about taking on the management role, or they were just made a manager, and it's not going well.
Mm-hmm.
And it's painful to watch, right? It's painful for not only for their employees who haven't been delegated to clearly, don't get approbation that they're looking for, but they themselves feel bad. And they know they're letting their team down. And so the way I'll start with that is looking at our standard of ethics, which is the pledge of managerial power. It's just on one page. Again, this is all free, the about page on our website. And back to the idea I mentioned, manager has so much power, over their employees, even if you're a little team, much less you're, Mary Barra, CEO of General Motors.
Mm-hmm.
And most people just haven't been talked to about that, and most people are good people, huge majority of them, I believe. And so, but ethics are something you need to learn. You need to understand the situation in which you're applying your morals. And so when you make people realize that they have power, that they have to be careful not to abuse it. That's, to edge into that sort of tyrant mode. But they also have to remember that using their power, their authority, I try to avoid the softer, comfortable language, right?
Mm-hmm.
Right. We'd have management tries to soften things a lot. So those, our matrix of authority. Well, it's how you use your power is what we're talking about. Mm-hmm. But you also are responsible to use that power. You're a manager, again, whether you have a team of 2 or 200,000, you have to make decisions. You have to work with team members who are having a hard time fitting in. You have to, if you're in the middle, very hard position to be in, you have to go to the boss and fight for resources. Mm-hmm. You might have to add teammate. You might have to ask somebody to go. So you have a responsibility not just to abuse your power, but to use it correctly. And so I like to talk about that first with someone who is asking that fundamental, question about, should I be a manager? Should I stay being a manager? And really help them reflect on the reward system. That's step 2. So first is talk about the ethics. People are very sensitive to that because they're good-hearted. Then you ask about the reward system. When you go from, and Jason, I think you've done this in your career, you go from being an individual contributor specialist, mm-hmm. and the reward is fairly straightforward, right? You close a transaction with the credit union, the customer mm-hmm. smiles, there's your reward.
Yep.
But when you're a manager, now your reward is a step removed. And that takes some getting used to. Mm-hmm. And then if you're an executive, which by definition is a manager of managers, well, now you have to do what I call fly by the instruments, right? The reward system becomes pretty ephemeral. Mm-hmm. However, you see that though in your team's performance, mm-hmm. and the smiles on their faces, their attitude, you get feedback pretty quickly and the reward pretty quickly.
I have some questions about that.
Okay.
We'll get to that. I definitely want to talk about manager of managers and, moving up the ladder and how that management style might change.
Yeah. Well, if I want to finish your question, the third and last point about, you ask, how do you put people on the path of management or help them understand it? And then mm-hmm. third is to introduce them to the standard of competence. What do you need to know? Mm-hmm. And that we call the Milwaukee model of manager development. And it's called the Milwaukee model because I was sitting in a coffee shop in Milwaukee when I sketched it out. There you mm-hmm. go. But, and again, all this is free on the website, but it starts with, what is a manager? I've been sort of teasing people about that and versus leader. Mm-hmm. A lot of brain damage about the difference, right? So a manager is someone who helps people work together. Sounds mm-hmm. simple, hardest job in the world. Mm-hmm. A leader is someone who inspires people to take a risk. And they
doesn't necessarily need to be a manager to be a leader.
Oh, yeah, I'm going to argue that they do.
Oh, okay. All right. Interesting.
Because you can't manage a team, take on a project, mm-hmm. Making a process improvement without being inspiring. Take a risk, try something new. Mm-hmm. It could be something little. It could be something practical. build a building,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or upgrade your ERP system, heaven forbid.
Mm-hmm.
Or it could be a more personal challenge like develop new skills, reflect.
Sure. What about the flip side of that? Can an individual contributor be a leader?
Yeah. Well, then you can't be a leader without being a manager as well. So we had a Secretary of State, James Baker III, who once said, a leader is someone who knows what to do and then does it. And so that's the marriage of vision and execution.
Mm-hmm.
And really, a leader has to do, the practice of leadership. Again, that's also been way overlooked, but which we have a standard now for that. You have to set the challenge, you have to inspire everybody, and then you have to make it happen, right?
Mm-hmm.
And yes, you can, a CEO who's a visionary is going to have managers who do most of the management work, but that leader still has to understand and practice management, helping people work together.
Absolutely.
So, anybody can set a good example and be a leader in that sense, and that's a great thing, of course. But that's not what we're talking about. That's a different context.
Maybe leader isn't the best word there. Maybe inspired. You can be an individual contributor and inspire people to do good work, or inspire people to make the right decision, but you're not necessarily leading them to do that. Leadership, I guess, is execution is implied in the word leadership, and inspiration doesn't necessarily.
Yeah, that's perfectly said. Execution is implied.
Okay.
And a lot of people, and I'm sure you've seen this in the credit union, right? Many people are individual contributors, managers, and executives all at the same time, right? And you have to go in and out. A CFO is spending half their time on financial specialty areas, right? Some of their time they're managing, people directly, and they're part of an executive team reporting to the CEO, right? So people have to understand, that mix of rewards. But you had a question about managing managers.
All right. So before we get to that, I'm going to lead us down a path. So, we talked a little bit about bosses and bad bosses, and you mentioned the individual contributors. Let's start there. If I am an individual contributor, how should I consider the choice of pursuing a position in management? What are the things that I should be thinking about as an individual contributor to get me to that next step, if that's what I want to do?
Yeah. Some people take up that question. This is just sort of preamble to my answer. People sort of are interested in management careers, sometimes for the right reasons, sometimes not for the right reasons.
That's my follow-up question.
Right. Well, I'll answer that one first because that's the order I'll put it in. Anyway, sometimes, they're pissed off. They say, I'm going to change. I'm going to be an agent for change in this organization. Those guys, need to hear my voice. And so I'm going to make things better. And that can be a start. Of course, a lot of people are made manager because they just forgot to say no when they got promoted. But some people do think about it, more conscientiously, clearly. And I think for the person considering, a management career or a promotion, right, into a management role, what they should do is think about, the best boss they ever had, and how that person made them feel and what they did for them. And if they didn't, maybe they haven't had that experience, because it took me a while to have that experience in my career. It didn't happen right away, I can tell you. You can think about, maybe someone from earlier in your life, a sports coach, maybe a parent, maybe a teacher, or maybe someone, a religious leader, your pastor, a rabbi, or imam, whatever it might be, because management is a caring profession. And that's the perspective I'm really trying to get people to consider. Now, there have been lots of great work done thinking about servant leadership, but again, it's sort of that my problem with it only is that it seems to be the management somehow is not a servant role because of the artificial split between leadership and management. And so, reflect on that. And when, and here's a tip for your listeners, if they like or don't like networking, ask people about their favorite boss and what they were like and what they did. And people love to talk about their favorite boss. Mine was a guy named Ron,
Mm-hmm.
Ron Jarek, who I won't say literally saved my life, but almost. Um, and when you have enough of these conversations, you start to hear the same kinds of things, right? They cared about me. It's the number one thing. They knew what they were doing, right? They were competent. They had experience. That was necessary to help me, have new experiences to grow and to learn. And they'll say they were tough sometimes. They'll hear that. You'll hear that all the time. They challenged me. They didn't let me off easily. They let me fail.
Mm-hmm.
They didn't blame me when I failed, because they understood that was part of their responsibility too. And so you hear those things. So if you're thinking about being a manager, think about that person, talk about that person, talk to that person if you can, and get that feeling to say, oh, I would like to be that person for someone else, for lots of other people.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember at my book launch party, there's a friend brought a friend, and this young woman was talking about, her great boss. We went around the table and talked about that. And I asked her, what she was like, and she shared these same characteristics. And she worked at a sort of middle-sized organization. So I asked her, how many people do you think that woman, that boss of hers, helped in her life, in her career, while you were working with her? Oh, she easily influenced, 500 people, easily, direct reports and people in the organization. I said, where is she now? Well, she went to work for a Fortune 50 company at a very high level. So she's probably helping thousands of people.
Mm-hmm.
When I think of someone like that here in Madison, there's a woman, Kathy Blumenfeld. She's the Secretary of Administration, sort of the number 2 person in state government. I've known Kathy for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And she is unbelievable as a manager. And she has the charisma, intelligence, but mostly she has the heart and strength to say no. She can be tough. Oh boy, you can't take that role without being really tough.
Mm-hmm.
But she never fails to listen to each person and their story, and to treat them as an individual, to really listen and care. And there is skip way ahead. There's a spiritual quest here. To be that kind of person, it's hard. And that's the thing that because I now am an educator, not a consultant. Because I learned it, frankly, I get better. My clients, students, some of them who are my age, get better results if I'm when I'm educating them to do things on their own rather than as a consultant. Here's my answer.
Yep. It's hard to break an old dog of their tricks. It's way easier to get them while they're young.
Yep, much easier, much easier. So I hope I answered your question.
You did. So, one of the things you mentioned was domain knowledge, and you didn't mention it in those terms, but is domain knowledge a requirement of being a good manager or a good leader?
Well, at first, yes. When you're a first-time manager, or you just you have direct reports, you're not managing managers, absolutely, you have to have domain knowledge. You have to have 2 types of it. I mean, you have to know, for example, if you were a branch manager at a credit union, right? Kind of person you probably know pretty well, right? They have to know about
being a branch manager,
loans, and how the teller drawer works, and dealing with the financial issues of credit.
Absolutely.
One of my favorite stories about great bosses is the CEO of a credit union. Someday, maybe we have a chance, I'll fit that in. But there's the domain knowledge in management itself is another thing that people need to think about. And here's where standards really help. And again, I'd point people to the Index of Management Terms and Practices. Again, link to it from the website. Because you need to know, as a manager, branch manager, say, I think everybody can picture that, whatever industry they're in. You need to know a little bit about all of the major marketing management disciplines. You need to know about marketing and sales. You need to know about operations. You need to know about HR. You need to know about information systems, and you need to know about corporate finance as well. That's separate from credit union products, services. You need to know enough of that because you need to work cross-functionally, and it's amazing to me how people will talk about an organization. We have silos here, right? Communication is awful.
Mm-hmm.
My boss is something.
Mm-hmm.
Just never. And I'll ask, I've learned not to be snarky. My wife has helped me with that a lot. But I'll say, well,
it.
I'll ask people, well, okay, if you don't know what those bozos in operations are doing, have you taken one of them out to lunch and say, tell me what you do?
Mm-hmm.
And again, the index is a great way to prepare for, every term. There's a hierarchy starting with those major disciplines I listed. There's 3 good questions in every term. So you can go into those meetings asking good questions, and one application of many of that is to, get to know the people in the other silos. So they're no longer silos,
right.
But teammates.
So which is more important? Which of those domain knowledges would you say you should be stronger in as a manager? The domain knowledge of your operation, being a branch manager, or the domain knowledge of being an effective manager within an organization?
Yeah. Well, it changes as you progress through your management career. So there's basically 3 steps of management. You're a manager with direct reports. Those reports are individual contributors or specialists. Then executive. I mean, the definition of that word is executive function. You've heard that term. Is managing managers.
Yep.
And then the third, of course, is chief executive. And, good chief executives don't make a big point about how different their job is from anybody else in the C-suite. But, it's a huge step and a very rare person who can do that well. So when you're a new manager, you're a branch manager or you're a shift leader at a factory, or a service line manager in a nonprofit or a government agency, you're probably spending 30-40% of your time in management, so therefore domain knowledge, that domain, and the rest of your time sort of out in the specialized area. You get to be a manager or managers, an executive, that probably shifts 60% of your time in management, and 40% on specialist issues, and chief executive almost 90% of their time as on the management things. So that's a lifetime journey. And then of course you can go from being CEO of a small, simple organization to CEO of a very large, complicated one. And then the dimensions then, while management principles are almost entirely universal, there are some different areas or sectors. Of course, family business has this whole set of issues. Of course, for-profit, non-for-profit, public and private, and then government, non-government, and 95+% of that domain knowledge of management is universal. It scales and expands. So that's my one pitch, of course, for pursuing it and putting in the hard work, is that the world is going to needs generalists now, generalist managers now, and with AI, oh boy, the premium is going to go up, as I was saying. And so as a career opportunity, because CEOs everywhere are dying for people who can, genuinely manage and lead lead a team, a department, a project, and so it's a great career, not for the faint of heart. And you have to have a great deal of personal maturity to deal with people who are upset. That's a whole other conversation. But that, if you approach it as a spiritual challenge, this is going to help me be more attentive, more patient. The words that we use: empathy, sympathy, compassion, caring. It's going to make me a better person. Then, as long as you accept that and acknowledge that, then you'll be okay.
I think as you, for your branch manager example, I think the way that I see it is, I agree. There's 2 knowledge domains there that I think you need some experience in. I think you're closer to the individual contributor in those situations, and in some cases, you're probably filling in for an individual contributor in some way, shape, or form. So I think certainly at the manager level, if it's 50-50, it's probably in that ballpark. You need to have some domain knowledge in management and some domain knowledge in what you're doing. I think as you go up the ladder a little bit, I think that that percentage shifts a bit more to the management skill set, managing multiple streams, multiple simultaneous work streams from different departments, different areas. It's a different skill set than just making sure that I've got 6 people in the branch while it's open and that there's not gaps and we're filling in for lunch and things like that.
Right.
Totally different skill sets. And as you start to climb that ladder, you can almost take a CEO that's almost 100% domain knowledge in the management space, pick them up and move them to another, maybe not industry, but certainly another organization in a like industry, and still be very successful, because it's, again, managing the doers of things. And, you know, you yourself are more of a conductor, doing more by proxy more than actually by pulling levers and flipping switches and things like that. Yeah. Would that be a fair assessment?
I think so. And I have a friend, Tom Oakley, who is just one of the best managers, you know, I've ever met. And he's been in biotech and manufacturing. Tom could go into any business and do a good job to running it. And, you know, he would learn the domain knowledge, the specific, you know, industry knowledge. He would know what to ask, what he needed to know, what he didn't need to know. And there are people like that. They're rare, but oh my gosh, valuable.
Well, I think that speaks to their level of knowledge in the management domain, because that's a good manager. You go into a situation, you do the research that you need to do in order to be conversant in whatever you're going to talk about or whatever you need to discuss. And you may not know that before, you know, that scheduled appointment, but if you're a good manager, you're going to do the preparation that's required to do that. So I think that's, you know, that's a gold star in the management domain expertise on that person's part. That's how I would approach it as a manager of managers.
Well, someone who comes to mind, not someone, of course, I haven't met, but you know, when you think of Tesla and SpaceX, you think of a certain person. But most people don't think about Lynn Shotwell, who is CEO, or I don't know what her title is, but she basically is the Uber manager. And I've watched her YouTubes, you know, speak, right, and you know, just amazing. You know, you can just see her competence, feel her competence. And her strong moral character, and you know, so those amazing generalists exist. They tend not to draw attention to themselves.
She's got to get hazard pay too for having to deal with the other one.
Well, imagine, right? And you know, there was a time when people say, "Oh, managers and leaders are different." People look at Apple, right? And there was a phase in Apple's own, you know, arc where Steve Jobs, everybody said, oh, he's the visionary, the leader. That's certainly true. And then they had Steve Scully. And well, the board brought in Steve Scully because Steve Jobs, you know, not that great of a manager.
Great engineer, great visionary,
right? People. A little hard to get along with. And then people forgot that he got fired from his own company.
Yeah.
And then he had to go start another one, which failed. And then he came back in the appropriate role at Apple. And so that, you know, that personality, amazing visionary who also has all of the management skills, you know, that's rare. So you'll even see, you know, CEOs will understand that about themselves, that they're strong in some areas of management, not in others. And, you know, they populate either the C-suite or the board, and they supplement themselves. They have the humility to do that. Steve Jobs, maybe not.
Yeah, Steve Jobs and Elon Musk are case studies in how probably not to be a manager. I think they're great visionaries. They have great ideas and they're great engineers. But in terms of managing people and, you know, culture and you know, keeping the human capital moving, they're not really great at that. They don't have that domain expertise.
Well, it certainly doesn't seem that way.
Yeah,
it really doesn't. And but you know, these are two guys, you know, just wired in their own amazing way, and you know, and maybe sometimes in spite of themselves, you know, their contributions are incredible. But as inventors, as engineers, and as spokesmen, oh my gosh, you know,
Yep.
They have
I mean,
that.
they are the mouthpiece for their product. They are their product.
They are
You
their
know,
product, and they know how to
100%.
sell it. Oh my gosh! I mean, I wish I had
Absolutely.
1% of either of their ability to, inspire people,
Mhm.
to try something new and to commit.
Mhm.
So,
if I'm an individual contributor, what skills should I be working on to make that jump to management? Let's just focus on that first step. Going to, the C-suite. Certainly, there's multiple steps there. Probably some additional skills, but let's focus on that first step from individual contributor to just manager.
Well, I mentioned, one of the standards is the standard of competence, the Milwaukee model, and there are four basic elements. As a consultant, there's a grid, right? Four boxes, and of the kinds of things the manager acumen, knowledge that they should have. The first is I'll call it the technical work of management, which we've been talking about, basics of marketing, sales, operations at a certain level. The second quadrant, if you will, is personal development, and that's communication ability, time management, your own personal goal setting, how you take care of yourself, decision making, if I didn't say that. So there's that category of things. The third is supervision, and that working with others, and that's where a lot of people are made. First-time supervisor. We could get in the whole mess of titles about managers. That's another problem. But
Team lead.
oh my gosh, director versus title versus a senior vice president. Oh my gosh, right. Very hurt. It's very harmful because it creates a lot of uncertainty and confusion. Anyway, third quadrant is supervision. So building a team, of course, dealing with conflict, communication there as well, maintaining high level of ethics, and those kinds of things that we traditionally mostly think about as a management job, but it's only part. And the fourth and last part of the Milwaukee model, the standard of competence, is the organizational perspective, ability to plan, interacting with people outside the organization, whether that's key customers, key vendors, the community, understanding risk, and seeing the organizational, things from the organizational perspective. So again, this is all online. I keep saying this, but there's a self-assessment form with that. Again, anybody could use. And 1 through 4.
We're going to include links to all of this stuff in the show notes, so people will be able to find it.
Good. And anybody, if they want some help working through it, they should feel free to call me. Okay. I'm happy to help. So your question is, what should first-time managers think about? Well, going through this model, then you have to think about, well, again, what is that sort of the management domain, technical stuff do I need to know? What don't I need to know? Which of the personal skills and attributes do I have? Do I need to work on? Are there things I don't have, not interested in? How comfortable I am, working with people? And you have to be ready. You have to have at some degree, some comfort to dealing with people who are disagreeing or upset. It's human nature.
Yep.
And and thinking about the ethics of that, and then of course some curiosity about the organizational perspective. So if you discover one, you're not curious about how the organization fits into the the local economy or its supply chain, if you're not curious about that, might not be a role for you. If you think that the idea of having power over other people, I'm working with someone right now, started an organization, is realizing that the power that they have, and they don't want it. They don't want it. And this is a very mature, thoughtful person. This is not. They're not. It's not because they're timid. On the contrary, but they don't want it. Okay, if you don't want that authority, you shouldn't be a manager. If you're comfortable with it and understand the limitations and have faith in yourself about that, okay. So you have to see: am I curious about these things? Do I want to learn more? If you're not curious about it, don't do it. Doesn't mean you have to know everything. Right. Nobody knows everything. But having the Milwaukee model is a way to sort of see, okay, these are the kinds of things I don't need to know everything today, but these are the kinds of things that I will need to learn. Are they interesting? That's the first step. And talk to good, your best boss, your favorite boss, people are good managers, inside and outside the organization, and ask them, do you think I would be a good manager? What questions would you have for me? don't take the step lightly, because not only, you make a bad career move and all those costs, but, you'll be setting the team back too.
Mm-hmm.
And no degree of friendliness or niceness or fun is going to compensate for not giving people meaningful work, clear direction, and a collaborative environment.
So let's say we've been deliberative about making that move. I'm an individual contributor. I've put in the work to make sure that I'm prepared, and I make the jump. I'm now, congratulations, you're the branch manager for a mid-sized credit union in Virginia. Congratulations.
Yeah.
So as a new manager, or even as a manager, that's been a manager for some time, what sort of additional training or follow-up training or, continual improvement initiatives should I be looking at for myself to continue to grow as a manager? Maybe not in pursuit of the next rung on the ladder, but just to make sure my skills stay fresh and that I'm taking advantage of, maybe some new concepts, maybe some new ideas in management, or because I'm pursuing that next rung on the ladder. What should I be looking at as a manager?
Right. There's two things you can do. Well, this Milwaukee model and the self-assessment that I've talked about is basically really a framework for an individual development plan. So you might say, oh, my time management skills need work. There you go. Or I really need to learn more about the HR function. So there's lots of different ways to do that. Go talk to your HR people for a while. Take them to lunch, for example, and so forth. So look, internal sources, and then there's some fairly straightforward kinds of training, and people like to learn in different ways. Some people will love LinkedIn Learning, and they like that mode. Others, they have to be interacting with other people, or they like the classroom, or they're readers. That's me, right? So working through that with your supervisor, hopefully the manager who's managing you is also mentor and helping you understand, well, you have these several things you should work on. These are the first ones. I'll help you, and so forth. Of course, and relating it to the context of, the job that you have. So it's not abstract, but, live learning. That's how our training programs are. It's always about a live project. Fundamental principles of adult education. Another thing that I think is so important, just so important, is to form or join a peer group, including people from outside the organization. A safe place where you can ask questions and learn things. And if maybe your boss is not really the person to be your mentor. Maybe there's a problem there. Maybe they're overworked. May not be the right fit. Find a mentor, and just start asking around, and you'll find them. There, people, who have, matured in their career. Generally, people love to do that role. It's not, you're doing them a favor almost by asking. So having a mentor, first understanding that again, what's called the ontology, the framework of what you need to know. That's the starting point. Outside learning, and I'm a believer in journaling.
Okay.
And it goes back to Dale Carnegie, and the Saturday morning, an hour every Saturday morning, writing, what did I learn? What mistakes did I make? And to think, I think this is particularly important in that journal. Write, the positive lessons you've learned about, your direct reports. I wouldn't write negative things because that's problematic legally, but I would write, Sally works for me. She did a great job on this thing. I see that her strengths are this. And when I suggested she learn that, she took that up, and she's a great teammate. But the point is, the critical thing about being a manager, if you see it as a calling, like my aunt, who is a teacher in the Catholic school system in Chicago forever, you have to get to know your kids, and individuals. So make an effort to do that. And everybody has a different style. Some people are more outgoing. Some people have to sort of force themselves to be, to have a little non-structured time. But a piece of advice that came from a CEO to his COO, who had been promoted recently, who now had to go travel all over the world, go to lots of different plants and facilities. He said, I want you to spend at least half your time just talking to people. Half your time. Imagine that.
Mm-hmm.
This COO, half your time just talking to people.
Mm-hmm.
Don't have an agenda necessarily, right? Don't overfill your schedule. Just go
Mm-hmm.
talk to them and get to know them. Let them get to know you, trust you. It takes time. So,
I mean, it's an important skill set is to be able to have that conversation and to be able to be open and engaging. And that's a critical tool in that tool belt.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
right.
Speaking of that, what would you say if you were to you're the mentor for some, and you probably do this all the time. If you're mentoring some new managers, what is the one tool that you would encourage them to make sure that they have in their tool belt? If there was one tool that you would pick, which would it be?
Well, it's the first one in our toolkit. It's called the quarter page meeting planner.
Okay.
And it relates to the index of terms. Again, people go online, they'll see how all this works. There's a simple set of instructions. But if you start, and certainly, the new manager in their first 30 days, we have a blog post, the 30-day quick start, things to do, things not to do. But if you can run a good meeting, or be a good meeting participant, even, that's, meetings are basically the mirror of management ability.
Mm-hmm.
And so the quarter page meeting planner, it's called a quarter page meeting planner. Picture an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper folded in quarters, so you can slip it into your pocket or purse or whatever you do. And what are we trying to accomplish? Clarify the goals. That's partly leadership, right? What are we trying to do here? And this is a huge theme of my work. You probably have talked about this with some of your other guests, is ask good questions. Don't have the answer. Don't.
Yep. I agree.
Right. And the quarter page meeting planner prompts you to put in, what are the 3 great open-ended questions? Again, the index has some samples. And it also sort of constrains you to say, well, how many people should be here? Who are the right people to have in the room? Not too few, not too many. And particularly in remote work, if you don't have, for each and every meeting, you don't have, a simple plan, clarity of purpose, discussion questions, a deadline, you're wasting everybody's time. And as I work with this wonderful trainer, Erin Lavery, her mantra is no agenda, no attenda.
I am absolutely stealing that. That is 100% on point.
Yeah. She would make a great guest.
No attendance. Perfect. I love that. So that's the first level. That's individual contributor to manager. So what about the big jump from, and you hit on it before, there's directors, AVP, VP, SVP, EVP, all of that.
Yeah.
There's manager, then let's just say executive. Just keep it easy. How do you make that jump from manager to executive? And I guess the important part is, like the question I asked before, how does a manager consider for themselves whether or not they're ready for that, or whether or not they have the skills for that? I'm sure you're going to say that there's a self-assessment that you can take online. I'm guessing, but what should I do as a manager thinking about climbing that corporate ladder? How should I self-assess that?
Yeah. Well, there's only one assessment for a first-time manager or CEO. So we try to keep it simple.
Good.
And certainly I would go back to that and what do I need to learn? How has that shifted, or how will that shift? And you also, again, have to reflect on now the amplified, power that you have. So it's a time to revisit that. Again, same tool, same questions, a lot more subtle, more complicated. And I think one of the things that's most difficult, is to think about how you use your time. I shared this story about, a new chief, someone new to the C-suite, being not told, because the CEO would never tell anybody, but suggested strongly that you spend, half your time, just talking to people.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have to really look hard at your time. Again, our work group developed this really cool one page, on, how do you have that conversation about time allocation?
Mm-hmm.
And we've already talked about the elements of that pie chart, right? It's individual contribution time,
Mm-hmm.
Time for self-development, and then so forth, the management activities. Well, now that's going to change. That allocation of time is going to change a lot. And so you have to think about how that pie chart of your time is going to change. How much more time are you going to spend just talking to people, time in planning, time looking at policy. Those are macro issues that executives deal with.
Yep.
And here's the thing that people sometimes forget. They have to then talk to the managers who are working for them now and get them to change or talk to them about how they use their time. Because time is like water. It does not compress. And people kid themselves about how they use their time, and then they get burned out and quit. Or they're working on the wrong things.
Yep.
And people are very sensitive about talking about how they use their time because they don't want to reveal that they're not working efficiently or effectively. But again, for someone stepping into the executive function, because they're going to have to now fly by the instruments, so they're going to have to really change how they use their time. And now, the other critical answer, I think, part of this answer is understand information and really understand, all the things that go into a good, a system of information in an organization. It's been an interesting thing in the whole management world. We used to have the computer department, and then it became information tech, information systems. And now we're really in the information age. The technology is secondary. And then, we have these amazing tools, for analyzing the data that flows through a company. Not many people know how to use them. That's a whole other, the genuine business analyst person, that's a rare bird. Oh my gosh. But an executive has to be that person. They have to, of course, they have to understand data quality. They have to understand the perspectives, limitations of data, different sources of data, and using data for different things. They, of course, have to become, highly literate financially, right? Much more than, frontline manager needs to be. So understanding, production numbers and what do they mean? Of course, it's different. Of course, you're in a 30-person or, a 30-person manufacturer or local business, or you're multinational. But even still, you have to start to really understand data and what that means. And at the same time, not lose your humanity.
Would it be fair to say that the jump from individual contributor to manager and the jump from manager to executive isn't so much about maybe having different skill sets? It maybe is a different lens by which you apply those skill sets. So the manager is applying those sort of at a micro level within kind of more constraints. The executive is doing it more at a macro level at a 50,000 foot view, so that they have the bigger picture of all of the, individual business units and all of the flows of data and root causes and all of those sorts of things. Whereas the manager is focused on basically what's in front of them and managing that content. The shifting of percentages in relation to management versus actionable operation might shift, but you still have to be a good time manager. You still have to be a good communicator. You still have to be a good, relationship builder, an empathic individual, somebody who can identify with people, be, ethical, and all of those sorts of things, just at a macro level versus a micro level. Would that be fair to say?
Right. And the lens is the data, right? Primarily. Absolutely. And having a plan. We did a national study in conjunction with B2B CFO some years ago. And I think I mentioned this, less than 10% of businesses have a plan they follow. Lots of people have plans in a binder on their shelf.
Exactly.
Just a funny story about that.
We're doing strategic planning. We create it, we put it in the binder, and it stays on the shelf until we do strategic planning again at the end of the year.
And a story I love to tell about that. I was with a friend of mine, Bill. We were talking to the CEO of a company, doesn't matter what the topic was.
Mm-hmm.
But we said, do you have a strategic plan? And he just turns and he points to see that binder.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, strategic plan. And so because I'm kind of in the business, I said, well, tell me about your strategic plan. He said, you're the first person to ask, Derrick, because there's nothing in that binder.
It's empty.
It's empty.
Oh, I love it. That's outstanding.
3-inch binder full of air. I'm just been waiting for someone to ask me about the plan. But we have one, check. So
that is outstanding.
Yeah.
I love that. That's a great story.
I have matched stories about a credit union CEO.
Mm-hmm.
If I'll share it. It's very much to this point.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm talking about Andy Faust, who's retired. He grew what's called Summit Credit Unions here in the Madison area.
Mm-hmm.
One of his habits in meetings, this is about managing data and delegating. This is a story. He had a sharp sense of humor,
Mm-hmm.
but you give him a piece of paper or a report. I was in helping doing some planning work. And he would make a joke, sort of. He'd have a pencil with an eraser on the end, and he'd use that eraser to push the paper that you'd given him away from himself to say, I'm not going to, just tell me what's in there. I don't want to touch any of your paper, And he's making a point, is that you better have figured out, you must be ready to decide. Don't make me figure it out. If you need my approval, okay.
Mm-hmm.
But no, don't engage me in your analysis. I delegated the decision to you.
Yep.
And that's a key thing that great executives do is they delegate projects, and they delegate goals, not tasks.
Yeah.
Jason, I want you to grow market share in that region by 13%. Go do it.
Yep.
And by the end of it, call me if you need some help. I hope you don't.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So that was one.
As long as you're providing the resources, both in terms of money and human capital,
right,
then I think that's that's the way you need to do it.
Yeah.
If you're gonna make them cook the meal, you got to let them shop for the ingredients too, with some boundaries, obviously.
Yeah. Well, that's part of the executive role, is to create the conditions for success, and that's you got to money, of course, and tools and so forth, and right people. But another story about Andy, which I think is so important. So early in my career, I worked on what the world calls strategic facility planning, but we were helping develop buildings, and they had planned a new credit union branch, beautiful building on the west side of Madison, and going strong today. And Andy would come to the job meetings in the construction trailer, and he would sit at the end of the table smoking underneath the no smoking sign, and he'd hardly say a word. And then one day, it was towards the end of the project. You go around the table, if you've ever been in one of those meetings, the general contractor, okay, is everybody on schedule? What's happening? We got to the landscaper, and the landscaper said, well, we were going to plan on Tuesday, but it was raining, so I'm going to be out a week late. Andy picks his head up. He says, I was out here on Tuesday. It wasn't raining. Pause. Your firm does all of the contract work for all of our credit unions. Pause. If you're not back on schedule by this Friday, I'm going to cancel all those contracts. And he goes back to smoking his cigarette. So that was it. As a leader, right? Incredible delegation. I made mistakes. Mistakes happen. He didn't care.
Absolutely.
As long as you took responsibility and dealt with it, right?
Yep. Lying,
no.
Nope.
That's cancer.
Absolutely.
And you can be sure that contractor was on time. You can be sure every other contractor was on time.
Absolutely. Without a doubt. Yep. He sent the message loud and clear.
And clear.
Yep.
He picked his moment, it was brilliant. It kind of chokes me up to think about it. But he was that's a great leader too, right? That's incredible. Honesty is just absolutely essential. And you're not only are you in the spotlight as executive, chief executive, but you just simply can't let unethical, immoral behavior happen. You just can't.
Definitely not.
Right.
Derrick, this was outstanding. We could probably talk for another 5 hours on management and bosses and leadership, and then probably even dabble into the AI stuff. But
that'd be fun.
Yeah, we don't want our listeners to have to listen for 5 hours. We're going to geek out over this stuff. They're just going to go to sleep.
That's right.
So let's wrap with this. And we talked about this before we started. And I'm shamelessly stealing a thing that I've seen from another podcaster. So what I do is I ask my last guest to provide a question for my next guest. So
Okay.
I'm going to give you that question. That question is from a gentleman by the name of Damien Lacey. He is an Australian who we had an excellent conversation about process improvement. And his question, and the question does not need to be related to our podcast episode, could be completely random. What's your favorite color? Do you believe in Santa Claus? Those are completely acceptable questions. So
Okay.
he happened to pick one that was a little bit close to his, field of expertise, but you're certainly not required to do that. So I'm going to ask you his question and get your response. And then I'm going to ask you for a question for my next guest. So
All right.
his question was, what's the one thing that you've done personally that has improved your productivity in a noticeable way?
Well, that's interesting. This is going to upset a lot of people, but I gave up, I won't name it, online work task management tools.
Okay.
And I went back to having a piece of paper with check boxes that I draw myself.
Oh, okay.
And
why did you do that?
Well, because I found one that, because, the promise of these tools, it's available all the time and it has prompts and bells.
Mm-hmm.
I was getting way too stressed out
Mm-hmm.
and losing focus,
Mm-hmm.
becoming less productive.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, I work pretty much by myself. I have a small group of people that I collaborate with regularly.
Mm-hmm.
We have a great working relationship. So some of those tools maybe are helpful for bigger teams,
Mm-hmm.
but technology is not always our friend.
Mm-hmm.
And so that helped me be a lot more productive.
Mm-hmm. My wife is a planner disciple. She makes her planners. She buys templates and layouts for planners. She's got me hooked into these disc binders.
Oh yeah.
It's a sickness. I mean, I'm not going to lie. She's probably not going to get to the end of this episode. It's a sickness. But she's not the only one. My father, when we were growing up, he was a daytimer guy. So he has those small, 4-inch by, 6-inch binders and wrote everything in it. And even to this day, he's got an iPhone now, so he's got all the digital stuff, but he still has a daytimer, and he opens it up, and he's 80s. Yeah. So he still does a ridiculous amount of manual labor and stuff for somebody his age, but he'll open it up and write dimensions and go to the Home Depot and get lumber and all that kind of stuff. He is, so I've got a ton of people. Yeah, it is. I got a ton of people doing the same thing, and I'm fighting it, but here it is. When I need to make notes, I make notes with this. There's an iPad or there's a tablet sitting over there, and I could use that, but I choose to use this. I don't think you'll ever see me journaling in something like this, because this much worth of notes is going to give me hand cramps. So I can't imagine writing, even a bulleted list of things is going to be a challenge for me. So that's an interesting, I hadn't thought of that, but that's an interesting perspective. So what's your question for my next guest?
Well, I mentioned it earlier, and it sounds so simple, but who is your favorite boss and why?
Okay. All right.
And
I like it.
You'll find it adds a lot of energy, positive energy to any conversation. And more people should be asking that question, because then more people will want to be that person.
Absolutely.
So that's
model the what is that saying? Model what you'd like to see in the world. And if everyone's modeling themselves after their favorite boss, there's probably worse things in the world.
That's right. Yeah. It's a great thing to be.
Absolutely. Well, this was awesome, Derrick. I absolutely appreciate your time. We may find an opportunity to hop on one of these again and continue our conversation and get into some other things. But I think this was a great first start.
All right, Jason. Well, thanks. I had a ball. And whenever you want to continue our 5-hour conversation, I'm in.
I will reach out. I greatly appreciate it.
The views and opinions expressed on this podcast are those of the host and guests and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of any organization, employer, or entity. The content provided is for informational and entertainment purposes only and should not be considered professional advice. Always seek the guidance of a qualified expert for any specific concerns. Thank you for listening to the Knowledge Stack Podcast.